It was Father's Day, a typically mild June day in our suburban Toronto home. My daughter had sent over a package, supposedly a surprise, but the moment Eleanor, my wife, laid eyes on it, she whispered, "Robert, don't even think about opening that." I raised an eyebrow. What's the big deal? But then I saw it, really saw it, and a chill went right through me. 10 minutes later, the RCMP pulled up. You'll never guess what was waiting inside. "Dad," Chloe's voice cut through the air, sharp as a winter wind. "Don't you get it? I need that money, now, not when you're 6 feet under." A ceramic mug filled with lukewarm coffee slipped from her trembling manicured fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. A dark, ugly stain spread across the hand-knotted wool rug Eleanor bought years ago. Chloe's face was flushed, her whole body vibrating with a fury I couldn't comprehend. My knuckles went white as I clutched the inheritance papers tighter, their edges digging into my palm. 30 years. 30 years of careful planning, of scrimping and saving, of putting every last loonie aside for our future, for her future. Now it was just ammunition in Chloe's desperate hands. The papers crinkled and groaned under my grasp. "Chloe," I said, my voice low, "I'm not an ATM, eh? You'll get what's coming to you when the time is right, not a minute before." Liam, her husband, sank deeper into our worn leather sofa, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Come on, Robert," he drawled. "She's your only kid. What's a few thousand just to help us out?" A few thousand. The nerve of that man. Last month it was the hockey bets. Before that, Chloe's boutique splurges. The requests never stopped. They just kept getting bigger, bolder. "Help you out." I pushed myself up slowly from my armchair, my 66-year-old knees groaning in protest like a winter-worn porch swing. "I've been helping you out for 3 years straight, Liam. My retirement fund isn't your personal credit union." Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel twisted nervously in her hands. "Please, everyone," she pleaded, her voice soft. "Let's just calm down. We can talk about this reasonably." "Reasonably?" Chloe whirled on her mother, her eyes flashing. "He's sitting on a small fortune while we're drowning in debt." "Debt you created," I countered, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room. "Debt from your choices." On the old pine mantel, our framed family photo taken on that trip to Banff years ago lay face down. Had it simply fallen during Chloe's outburst, or had someone, perhaps Chloe herself, deliberately flipped it over? The silver frame, a wedding gift from Eleanor's aunt, just reflected the kitchen's overhead pot lights, like a blank sheet of ice, showing nothing but empty, blinding light. Liam leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Look, Bob," he began, using that infuriating nickname. "You're not getting any younger, are you? Why not enjoy sharing your nest egg while you're still around to see it appreciated?" "Old man," the words echoed in my head, a bitter, sour taste on my tongue. This from a man who'd never held a steady job, who'd freeloaded off my daughter's credit cards and my occasional begrudging generosity. "Because I worked 43 years for that money, Liam." Each word I spat out felt like a stone, harder than the last. 43 years of 12-hour shifts, of missed family dinners, of canceled trips to the cottage. All so you, Chloe, could have a comfortable childhood. Also your mother Eleanor and I could retire with a bit of dignity. Dignity. Chloe let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, sharp enough to cut through glass. "What's dignified about hoarding your cash while your own daughter suffers?" I looked at her designer handbag, probably from a Yorkville boutique. Her freshly highlighted hair, the sparkle of new jewelry, Liam's pristine, still-laced sneakers. Their suffering looked remarkably cozy. "Your suffering is self-inflicted, Chloe." The words burst out raw and unfiltered before I could rein them in. Every so-called crisis, every emergency, every desperate plea for money. You engineered every last one of them all. The silence that followed was so thick, so taut, it felt like piano wire, stretched to its breaking point. Eleanor moved further into the room, her face pale as a winter sky. "Robert," she whispered a plea in her voice. "Maybe we should..." "Should what?" Chloe's voice cracked like ice underfoot. "Should keep enabling your selfishness. Should keep pretending you're a loving father instead of a greedy old miser." Each accusation landed like a punch to the gut. Greedy, selfish, unloving. 43 years of sacrifice, of putting my family first. And this was my reward. Liam rose to his feet, his usually smooth features twisting into something ugly, truly ugly. "You know what I think, Bob?" he snarled. "I think you enjoy watching us scrape by. Makes you feel like a big shot, doesn't it? Get out." The words rumbled from a place deep in my chest. I rarely visited a low, guttural growl. "Both of you, get out of my house. Now." "Your house?" Chloe's eyes glittered, not with tears, but with a cold, dangerous fire. "This house, the one Mom worked her fingers to the bone to help pay for, this house where I grew up. You can't just kick out your own daughter. Watch me." But she didn't budge. Neither did Liam. They stood there, two vultures circling, sensing weakness, waiting for me to back down, waiting for the usual surrender. No, not this time. I strode to the front door, pulling it open wide, the cool June evening air sweeping in. It carried the faint, sweet scent of honeysuckle from Mrs. Henderson's garden next door, and the distant, easy laughter of neighbors. Normal families, having normal conversations. How long had it been since laughter echoed in our house, Chloe? I said, my voice low, not bothering to turn around. "Take your husband and leave. Don't you dare come back until you're ready to have a respectful conversation about your financial problems and your solutions that don't involve my wallet. You'll regret this, Dad," she hissed, snatching her designer purse from the console table. "When you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you, remember this moment, eh? Remember how you chose money over your own family." Her heels clicked across the hardwood like a drum solo, each tap a fresh stab. Liam followed, pausing right on the threshold, his eyes glinting. "This isn't over, Robert," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "Family doesn't just walk away from family." The front door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the windows, and the silence that followed felt heavier than all their shouting had. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my knuckles white around the cold brass handle. Through the frosted decorative glass panels, I watched Chloe's shiny BMW reverse aggressively out of our driveway tires, squealing a protest on the asphalt. Eleanor's soft footsteps approached from behind a gentle counterpoint to the chaos. "Robert," she whispered. I turned slowly. The living room looked like a battleground. Dark, ugly coffee stains bled into the Persian rug we'd carefully chosen for our 20th anniversary. Inheritance documents lay scattered across the polished hardwood floor like discarded brittle leaves. The framed family photo lying face down on the mantelpiece seemed to wink mockingly in the lamplight, as if sharing a secret I was just now learning. 43 years, I murmured more to myself than to Eleanor, the words tasting like ash. What she asked, her voice tight. 43 years. I repeated a little louder this time, my voice cracking. 43 years of 12-hour shifts, of missing my turn at the cottage, of eating my lunch out of a cooler so she could have all the extras. New clothes every season, the best textbooks for university, that beat-up old Honda for her driving lessons, the big white wedding we probably couldn't truly afford, but paid for anyway, just so she could have her perfect day. Eleanor knelt, her movements careful and deliberate, picking up the scattered papers. She's struggling, Robert. The gambling problem is her choice. I countered the words sharper than I'd intended. Every spin of the roulette wheel online, every visit to the casino, every lie about where the allowance went. Those were her choices. I walked to the mantel and slowly, almost reverently, righted the family photo. 5-year-old Chloe smiled back at me, a gap between her 2 front teeth, innocent and joyful, perched on my shoulders at the Calgary Stampede. When had that sweet, goofy kid, all braces and dreams, turned into this manipulative stranger, demanding my life savings? I asked, my fingers tracing the glass. Remember when she desperately wanted that dollhouse for Christmas? The one from the fancy toy store downtown. I worked double shifts for 2 months to afford it. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. We both remembered. Just like we remembered the ballet lessons, the summer camps at Lake of Bays, the ridiculously expensive designer shoes, because all her friends had them. Every sacrifice made gladly for our daughter's happiness. And now she throws coffee mugs at me because I won't hand over my retirement fund. She didn't throw it at you, Robert, Eleanor interjected softly. She threw it at the floor. The distinction felt meaningless. The violence was the same whether aimed at me or my possessions. The disrespect identical. I bent down and picked up one of the inheritance documents. The legal language blurred as I read it, but I knew every clause by heart. Years of careful planning, conservative investments, delayed gratification. All so Chloe would be financially secure after we were gone. Liam's influence, Eleanor said quietly. He fills her head with these ideas about what we owe her. Liam didn't create her greed. He just gave it permission to show itself. The harsh truth hung between us, thick and suffocating. Our daughter had become someone we barely recognized. And we'd enabled it, hadn't we? Always giving in, always writing the check, always smoothing over her latest crisis with our money. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message from an unknown number. But I recognized the writing style immediately, that familiar entitled tone hitting me square in the chest. Dad, I hope you're happy. Think of your grandchildren freezing without proper winter gear, needing books for school, B. But clearly your precious savings matter more than your own flesh and blood. Don't hold your breath expecting to see them again. Grandchildren. The ultimate low-blow weapon in Samantha's playbook. My sweet Emma, 8 years old with her mischievous grin, and little Jake, barely 6 full of boundless energy, now just pawns in their mother's relentless quest for a handout. She knew precisely where to aim to twist the knife right into my heart. I passed my phone to Jessica, and her face, usually so composed, just crumbled right before my eyes. She wouldn't really deny us the kids, would she? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, thick with fear. But we both knew deep down that she absolutely would. It wasn't the first time, not by a long shot. Smaller skirmishes in the past had always ended with a cooling-off period, which invariably meant Emma and Jake were off limits for a week, sometimes 2, whenever we didn't immediately cave to her financial whims. They were just bargaining chips, weren't they? William. Jessica pleaded, her eyes wide. Maybe we should just reconsider. No, the word exploded from me, sharp and final, like a puck hitting the post. Not anymore. I was done being held hostage, done letting her use those innocent kids as leverage. I wouldn't stand by and teach Emma and Jake that a grandparent's love could be bought, or that family ties were just a series of transactions. Jessica flinched visibly, recoiling from the raw intensity in my voice. In 38 years of marriage, she'd seen me frustrated, sure, even annoyed, but rarely this seething with quiet rage. Even during our nastiest spats, I'd never spoken with such a chilling absolute finality, but something fundamental had irrevocably shifted that evening. A stark, brutal truth about my daughter, about the fragile nature of our relationship, about the future I'd always envisioned for our family. It all clicked into painful focus. The comforting illusion of selfless, loving sacrifice I'd clung to for so long had utterly shattered, just like that ceramic mug on the floor. My phone vibrated again, a jarring buzz. 6 days later, I was out on our front porch, the Sunday paper spread across my lap, trying to coax some semblance of normalcy out of the Father's Day morning. The coffee in my favorite maple leaf mug had long gone cold, but I kept holding on to it, watching the neighborhood slowly stir to life. The Maxwells next door were piling camping gear into their minivan, clearly off for a weekend adventure. Down the street, the Dillons were already out in their garden, their easy laughter drifting on the calm morning air, a stark contrast to the silence inside our own home. Jessica moved about in the kitchen, the gentle clatter of breakfast dishes, a familiar comforting sound through the open window. We'd spent the entire week tiptoeing around the gaping Samantha-shaped void in our family dynamic. Not a peep from her since that explosive night. No desperate calls, no entitled texts, no unannounced visits demanding cash, or equally unlikely an apology. This silence, though, felt profoundly unnatural. For 3 long years of her manufactured financial crises, Samantha had never gone this long without making contact. Usually by the 3rd day, she'd be ringing with half-hearted apologies and a few smaller, seemingly innocuous requests, just testing the waters before unleashing her next major plea for cash. But this was different. The absolute unyielding quiet felt deliberate, calculated, the kind of unsettling calm that precedes a true Canadian blizzard. A part of me, I'll admit, felt a deep, shameful sense of relief. Another part, though, gnawed at me with worry. The low rumble of a delivery truck broke through my reverie. I looked up from the sports section of the Star to see a brown courier van slowing down right in front of our bungalow. Odd. We weren't expecting anything, and Sunday deliveries were about as common as a hockey team making the playoffs with a losing record, unless someone had coughed up extra for premium weekend service. The driver, a young fellow with a bright blue uniform, hopped out, glanced at his handheld device, then pulled a medium-sized box from the back. He approached with the brisk efficiency of someone putting in holiday overtime. "William Carr?" he asked, a polite, almost apologetic smile on his face. "Happy Father's Day." He offered me his electronic clipboard. "Someone must really think a lot of you to spring for Sunday delivery, eh?" I signed my name, my eyes scanning the shipping label as he turned and walked away. There was no return address visible, just some generic shipping information. The box felt surprisingly light for its size, about the dimensions of a shoebox, but weighing maybe a kilo at most. "Who's that from, Will?" Jessica called from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands nervously on a dish towel. "No idea," I mumbled, carrying the package inside. I set it down on the coffee table, the very spot where those blasted inheritance documents had been strewn just 6 days ago. "No return address," she echoed, approaching with a mix of curiosity and an underlying caution. Jessica had always been more wary of unexpected deliveries, than I was a lifetime of watching the evening news with all its talk of package bombs and mail fraud doing its part. "Maybe it's from Emma and Jake," she suggested, but her voice lacked conviction, almost a question. Eleanor's voice lacked conviction. Emma had indeed asked about Father's Day when we'd seen them last month, before Chloe had turned them into pawns in her cruel game, before the endless threats and the chilling ultimatums. I tried to push those thoughts aside. Maybe I conceded, but a cold knot of apprehension was already tightening in my gut. The timing felt too precise, too staged, and Emma, bless her heart, wouldn't have sprung for some fancy Sunday courier service. She was only 8. Eleanor leaned in closer, her gaze fixed on the box, the kind of meticulous scrutiny she gave to everything from grocery coupons to crosswords. Her fingers traced the edges of the shipping label, a thoughtful frown on her face. "Robert," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "don't open it." My brow furrowed. "Why not?" Without a word, she pointed to something I'd completely missed in my hurried handling of the package. "Can't you see the holes there for breathing? Something alive is inside." My stomach plummeted faster than a stone tossed into Lake Ontario. Now that she'd highlighted them, I could see the tiny punctures in the cardboard, almost invisible, unless you were specifically looking for them. Small, perfectly precise holes clearly made with deliberate intent. "Breathing holes." I repeated the words flat, devoid of emotion. "Something's alive in there." Eleanor confirmed, her voice tight, already backing away from the coffee table, as if it might suddenly sprout legs. "The question is, what the heck is it?" We stood there in our living room, staring at the innocent-looking package rooted to the spot, expecting it to suddenly leap at us. The Sunday morning sunlight, which moments before had felt so warm and inviting through our living room windows, now seemed to cast an ominous pall. The suburban quiet, usually a comfort, felt heavy with unspoken dread. "Who on earth would send us something alive?" Eleanor whispered, her voice laced with a tremor I rarely heard. But even as the question left her lips, a chilling certainty began to crystallize in my chest. The timing, the anonymous sender, the high-cost Sunday delivery that ensured we'd be home, caught off guard. This wasn't some thoughtful Father's Day present. This was something entirely different, something engineered. From inside the box came the faintest sound, a soft, dry rustling that made us both freeze like statues. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an intense, ringing silence in its wake. Eleanor grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through the thin cotton of my polo shirt. "Did you hear that, Robert?" She breathed, her eyes wide. I nodded, my throat suddenly too dry to speak. Whatever was in that box was very much awake, and it was stirring. A soft, almost imperceptible hissing sound emerged from the cardboard, barely audible, but unmistakably real. We both froze again, staring at the package as if it were a ticking bomb. The sound ceased. Silence stretched between us, thick and taut as piano wire, like a breath held far too long. Then it came again, longer, this time. A distinct, drawn-out hiss that sent a river of ice flowing through my veins. Eleanor's grip on my arm tightened further, her nails biting into the fabric of my shirt. "Robert," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Call someone. Now." My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone muscle memory, taking over while my mind reeled, trying desperately to process the nightmare unfolding on our coffee table. The numbers felt alien beneath my shaking fingers. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. We have a suspicious package here. I blurted out the words, tumbling faster than I intended. something alive inside. It was delivered this morning, no return address, and it's making sounds. Sir, can you describe the sounds you're hearing? I glanced at Eleanor, who gave me a sharp, encouraging nod. The hissing had stopped again, but we both knew it was just a pause. Hissing? I said the word, catching in my throat. Like a snake. The thought, once unspoken, now hung in the air, chilling us both. Are there any visible threats or damage to the package? The dispatcher asked. No visible damage, eh? But there are small holes punched in the cardboard. Breathing holes. My voice cracked on the last words, betraying my terror. Sir, I am dispatching officers to your location immediately. Please maintain a safe distance from the package and do not attempt to open it. Can you move to another room? We're about 6 feet away, in our living room. I replied, my gaze still fixed on the box. Should we leave the house? Stay inside, but keep your distance, she instructed calmly. Officers should arrive within 10 minutes. Do not touch or move the package under any circumstances. The line went quiet, except for the rhythmic click of the dispatcher's keyboard. 10 minutes felt like an eternity when something dangerous was sitting there on our coffee table, growing more active with each passing second. Who on earth could do something like this? Robert Eleanor's voice, barely a whisper, cut through the buzzing silence after I'd finally managed to hang up with the dispatcher. It was the question I'd been fighting off, the one that hovered in the air like a cold, persistent fog. Naming the obvious felt like solidifying a nightmare. Admitting it would mean acknowledging that Chloe, our own daughter, had truly gone off the rails, stomped over lines I never thought she'd even approach. I'm afraid to guess, eh? I mumbled, my voice rough, but my brain was already racing, piecing together a mosaic of ugly truths. Father's Day, a perfectly normal Sunday. The anonymous delivery, the knowledge of our routines, our Toronto bungalow address, it screamed inside job. Someone had stewed on our last big blow-up, festering enough to concoct something so elaborate, so downright nasty. The box shifted again, a dry, papery rustle, followed by a soft drag that made us both instinctively recoil, bumping shoulders. It wasn't just a hiss anymore. It was something alive, trying to get comfortable, or maybe trying to get out. The fight, Eleanor whispered, from 6 days ago. She was so furious when she slammed the door. Eleanor didn't need to utter Chloe's name. We were both thinking at the same chilling realization settling over us like a winter storm. But as I pointed a trembling finger at the package, I shook my head. This isn't just anger, is it? I said the words, catching. This is something else. The unspoken word hung heavy, suffocating. Payback. Too grim, too cruel to voice, but impossible to shake off. Our only daughter, the one we'd poured our lives into, loved fiercely despite her flaws, had orchestrated this. Sent us something deliberately meant to terrify or hurt. Another insistent scrabble from the box, a more definite shifting, confirmed it was wide awake, probably disoriented, maybe even agitated by the hushed tension in the room. What in the name of Beulah do you do to your own parents? Eleanor's voice cracked a raw wound in the silence. Someone utterly desperate. I managed, though the explanation felt flimsy, like trying to patch a canoe with chewing gum. Someone who felt deeply wronged. But a cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. This was beyond desperation. This required forethought, a cold calculation, a level of vindictiveness that spoke to a truly fractured bond. Chloe hadn't merely lost her temper. She'd meticulously planned a psychological ambush. The sharp thunk of car doors outside made us both jump a foot. Through the shears on the front window, I could see a black and white RCMP cruiser. Thank goodness. It wasn't just local police. This felt bigger. In our driveway. 2 officers, their uniforms crisp, were already heading toward our porch with that deliberate calm stride you see from folks trained for serious business. Relief washed over me so fiercely, my knees nearly buckled. Actual professional help had finally arrived. Soon, whatever chilling nightmare lurked inside that seemingly innocuous box would be someone else's problem, thank goodness. The doorbell rang a sharp official chime that sliced through the suffocating quiet. I pulled the door open before Officer Reeves could even tap a second time. He filled the doorway, a tall, solid presence, with the keen assessing gaze of someone who'd seen it all, especially when family squabbles go sideways. His nameplate read, Reeves. Mr. Robert. I'm Constable Reeves, he stated calmly. We got your call about a suspicious package. Yes, thank you for getting here so fast, I said, stepping aside. It's in the living room. He wiped his duty boots on our Welcome A mat before stepping inside. Eleanor appeared in the hall, still clutching a dish towel, her hands twisting nervously. Officer, we're just so relieved you're here, she practically pleaded. We honestly didn't know what else to do. You did exactly the right thing, ma'am. He replied, his voice a steadying balm. Can you show me the package? He asked. We led him to the living room where the box seemed to have shrunk, looking almost insignificant, now that trained eyes were on it. Constable Reeves approached with measured steps, pulling on a pair of latex gloves from his belt. When did this show up? About 35 minutes ago, I told him. Sunday delivery. Someone shelled out big bucks for weekend service, eh? He leaned in, examining the shipping label carefully, not touching the cardboard. No return address, I see. And you mentioned sounds coming from inside. Hissing. Eleanor offered her voice, barely a breath trailing off. Like a snake. Constable Reeves finished his tone, completely unruffled. I've handled a few of these situations, typically non-venomous, but we always treat them like they're a grumpy moose. Better safe than sorry, eh? He then reached for his radio, pulling it from his belt. Right, I'm calling Animal Control. Constable Reeves announced, his voice snapping with authority as he spoke into his radio. They've got the proper gear for this kind of sticky wicket. He rattled off our address, 1247 Maple Street, to dispatch requesting animal control for a suspected snake delivery. The static-laced confirmation came back a 20-minute wait. Then Constable Reeves turned to Eleanor and me, his professional veneer softening just a touch, replaced by a glint of shrewd inquiry. Any thoughts on who might have sent this, eh? The question hung in the air, a lead weight I'd been bracing for. I felt Eleanor's gaze on me, a silent plea to deflect, to protect. I don't know, I stammered, trying to sound casual. Probably just some neighborhood kids, playing a prank. Constable Reeves's eyes, already sharp, narrowed further. Kids, Mr. Carr. They'd need to get their hands on a live animal, the right shipping stuff, and know your address. This sounds like it took some planning and a fair bit of resources. My mouth went instantly dry. He was spot on. This wasn't some kid's clumsy joke. This was deliberate. Someone with both the means and a motive had intentionally sent us a snake of all things on Father's Day. Have you had any recent beef with anyone? He asked, then rephrased. Any family disagreements, perhaps? Family disagreements. The words hung heavy like a cloud of accusation. Eleanor tensed beside me, a ripple of fear going through her. We were both walking a tightrope, caught between wanting to be fully honest and feeling an ingrained, almost primal need to protect our own, even from themselves. Nothing that would lead to this. I finally managed the lie tasting like ash. Constable Reeves studied my face, surely picking up on my hesitation, but he didn't press. Instead, he pulled out a small, well-worn notebook. "Any odd charges on your credit cards lately?" He continued, flipping a page. "Like, say, from pet stores or exotic animal suppliers?" The question hit me square in the chest, a gut punch. Pet stores. The memory slammed into me with sickening force, pulling a specific detail from the fog of recent weeks, that line item on last month's statement. Chloe had used my card, as she often did, for what she'd called emergencies. Reptile Palace, $127.50. I'd seen it, skimmed over it, assuming it was some trinket for Emma or Jake, a toy dinosaur, perhaps. Never a snake. Never a snake. "Mr. Carr, are you all right?" Constable Reeves's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. I forced my expression into something resembling calm, though my heart was doing a wild drum solo against my ribs. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice thin. "Just processing all this." But I wasn't fine. The last hideous piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place with horrifying clarity, the precise timing, her intimate knowledge of our routines, and addresses her casual access to my credit card, the utterly cold, deliberate cruelty of choosing Father's Day. My daughter Chloe had sent me a snake. "Will you be filing a formal report, Mr. Carr?" Constable Reeves asked, his voice neutral. "We can launch an investigation into the package's origin pursue charges, if we pinpoint the sender." I looked at Eleanor, saw the exact same warring emotions in her eyes. A part of me, a deep, angry part, screamed for justice. But a much larger part, the one that had spent 38 years protecting Chloe, making excuses for her, shielding her from the consequences of her choices, couldn't bring itself to turn her over to the police. "No," I said quietly, the word feeling heavy on my tongue. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. If it's just a prank, I figure filing charges might be a bit much, eh?" I added, trying to sound reasonable. Constable Reeves merely made a note, his expression suggesting he'd seen this play out 100 times. Family loyalty winning out over justice, even when relatives crossed lines that most folks wouldn't dream of approaching. Just then another vehicle pulled into our driveway. Through the living room window, I watched a white van emblazoned with Animal Control Services pull up behind the cruiser. "That'll be Rob Morrison," Constable Reeves said, a hint of reassurance in his voice. "He's the best wildlife specialist in the region. He'll have this sorted out safely within the hour." But as I watched the animal control officer grab his gear, his movements calm and efficient, I knew the real mess, the true problem, was only just beginning. Within 20 minutes, Rob had skillfully extracted a 3-foot corn snake from the shipping box, confirmed it was a non-venomous variety, and gently loaded it into a secure carrier for transport to a local reptile rescue. "Beautiful specimen," he commented, securing the carrier in his van. "Someone shelled out good money for this one. Corn snakes are cracking good pets when they're looked after properly. A real shame someone used it for whatever this was." Constable Reeves shook hands with Eleanor and me, his gaze still holding a knowing quality. "Give us a shout if anything else comes to mind about possible senders, Mr. Carr," he advised. "Even pranks like this can get out of hand if they're left unchecked." I nodded, doing my best to maintain the facade of a man who still believed this was merely a prank, while my mind churned with far darker possibilities. Both the RCMP cruiser and the animal control van soon disappeared down our quiet suburban street. The police cruiser and the animal control van had vanished down our quiet, tree-lined street, leaving Eleanor and me adrift in the strangely heavy silence of our living room. It felt different now, somehow tainted, even though Constable Reeves and Rob had been so efficient. The coffee table, usually the heart of our casual Sunday mornings, still bore faint watermarks where they'd disinfected the surface. The professional cleanup couldn't wash away the feeling of something sacred having been defiled. The inheritance documents, which had been scattered like fallen leaves, now sat in a neat stack, but their meaning had twisted. They weren't just about my retirement anymore. They were a stark reminder of the underlying rot that had led to this morning's gut-wrenching gift. From the kitchen I could hear Eleanor the faucet running hard, the clatter of dishes, a frantic rhythm. She always dove into stress cleaning when the world tilted off its axis. I gravitated to the front window, drawn by the familiar scene of the Maxwells next door, just getting home from their Father's Day adventures. Their minivan, packed with camping gear, held the joyful echoes of their kids' laughter. Normal. That's what it looked like. A normal family, a normal Sunday, a normal father who didn't get slithering surprises from his own flesh and blood. The memory of that credit card charge. Reptile Palace, $127.50 sauce, seared itself into my mind like a fresh burn. 3 weeks ago, almost to the day, right after that horrendous blow-up about the inheritance, the timing was too precise, too chillingly calculated. This wasn't a prank. It was a carefully orchestrated act of malice. My phone, suddenly heavy as a curling stone, felt cold in my palm as I scrolled to Chloe's contact. Her smiling face, captured at Emma's birthday party last year, stared back at me. A lifetime ago, it seemed. Before the endless demands, before the chilling threats about withholding the grandkids, before this Father's Day nightmare landed on our doorstep. "Are you really going to call her Robert?" Eleanor's voice, hushed and strained, came from the kitchen doorway. "I have to know, Elle. For sure." And then the terrifying part. If. She admitted it, what then? What could a father possibly do to a daughter who'd plunged so far into the dark? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent, impossible challenge. I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this conversation had to happen. It rang twice. Dad Chloe's voice, a little too bright, a little too saccharine, slid through the receiver. It was the tone she always adopted when she was fishing for a handout, or worse, trying to hide something. "How's your Father's Day going?" My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles blanched. If she was truly innocent, it was just a normal question. But if she was guilty, it was a knife twist. Interesting morning, actually. I managed keeping my voice as flat and unrevealing as the prairies. "Chloe, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a strange Father's Day gift, would you?" "No, Dad." "What happened?" Her reply was immediate, almost a reflex. Too quick. But then from the background, unmistakable, came the sound that truly buckled my knees. Liam's low, satisfied chuckle. Not the surprised gasp of someone genuinely hearing bad news, but the smug, self-congratulatory snicker of a man who thought he'd pulled off a brilliant prank. It hit me like a puck to the gut. Any lingering shred of doubt evaporated with that careless sound of amusement. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had sent me a snake, and her husband thought it was hilarious. Just a bit of confusion with a delivery, that's all I forced out, battling to keep my voice as steady as a rock on Lake Superior. "Nothing important. I should let you go." "Are you sure everything's okay, Dad? You sound strange." Strange. I was just finding out my only daughter had tried to terrorize me with a live animal, and I sounded strange. "Everything's fine, Chloe. You enjoy your Sunday, eh?" I hung up before she could say another word, before the carefully constructed dam of my composure burst wide open. The phone trembled in my hand, the full crushing weight of her betrayal settling over me like a sudden heavy snowfall. Eleanor was by my side in an instant, her gaze reading my face with the unspoken intuition that comes from 38 years of shared life. "You heard something." I just nodded, the words tasting like ash. "Liam." He laughed. In the background. When I asked her about the gift, he laughed like it was the best joke he'd ever heard. Her hand found my arm, a steadying anchor in the suddenly treacherous waters of our family. "What are you going to do, Robert?" she whispered, her voice laced with fear. I looked down at the phone, then across the room to my home office. In there on the computer lay access to bank accounts, credit cards, and all the financial lifelines that had kept Chloe afloat for 3 agonizing years. I knew what I had to do. I was finally going to teach Chloe about consequences. 7 o'clock found me planted firmly in my home office. The door clicked shut. The faint hum of the computer, a steady rhythm against the quiet suburban evening. I'd spent the entire afternoon walking the neighborhood, letting the cool June air clear my head mentally, sifting through 3 decades of financial choices that had led us to this brutal moment. The white-hot anger that had flared earlier had cooled, calcifying into something far more resolute, more purposeful. My solid oak desk, usually a place for pleasant hobbies or bill-paying, was now a monument to my misplaced generosity. Stacked high were the stark, damning records, bank statements detailing automatic transfers for Chloe's urgent rent payments, credit card bills I'd quietly settled without a peep, insurance premiums, car loan payments, even emergency cash injections that vanished like snow in July. 3 decades of enabling disguised as unconditional love. The worn leather portfolio beside my keyboard held even more damning evidence. Copies of hefty checks for her dream wedding, the bill of sale for my own reliable old pickup, sacrificed to cover her latest gambling debts, and countless e-transfer receipts for emergency assistance that had somehow morphed into monthly obligations. Each document, each line item whispered the same bitter truth. My daughter had learned to view her old man not as a source of wisdom or comfort, but as an inexhaustible ATM. The monitor cast a cool glow on my face as I navigated to our online banking portal. My fingers, surprisingly steady, danced across the keyboard, punching in the familiar passwords, ones I'd never willingly shared with Chloe. Yet somehow she always seemed to find her way around them. My first target, the credit card account, the very one that had carried that bizarre charge for a live animal just 3 weeks ago. Chloe was listed as an authorized user, a privilege I'd granted her way back in her university days for emergencies only. 20 years of emergencies later, it had become her entire lifestyle. I clicked Manage Users. The system, ever vigilant, asked for security answers my mom's maiden name, the street where I learned to ride my first bike, simple, almost nostalgic questions that ironically now granted me access to tools I should have wielded years ago. The screen offered a neutral blue prompt, remove authorized user. My cursor hovered over confirm for a good 10 seconds, not out of any lingering doubt, but from the immense tectonic shift I felt rumbling deep inside me. 30 years, Chloe. 30 years I've funded your irresponsibility. Enough. With a decisive click, I hit User Access Revoked. The screen confirmed, changes will take effect within 1 business hour. Next up were the pins. Chloe had a knack for sniffing out those numbers, probably peeking over my shoulder during one of our countless financial rescue missions. I punched in new digits, choosing the year Eleanor and I tied the knot. Numbers that held profound meaning for our life together, but would mean absolutely nothing to Chloe's endless schemes. Then came the automated payments requiring a bit more careful attention. The hefty monthly transfers to her checking account. The recurring payment for her car insurance, which always seemed to jump a few bucks. And of course, that high-end gym membership subscription she'd convinced me was essential for her mental health. Each cancellation prompted a final, "Are you sure?" confirmation. This wasn't just a few clicks. It was creating a definitive digital paper trail of my decision to finally shut down the Bank of Dad. My hands surprisingly remained as steady as a rock on the Canadian shield throughout the entire methodical process. No trembling, no second-guessing. This wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a long overdue dose of accountability. I thought back to just last month to Chloe's tear-soaked phone call about those colossal gambling debts. Her voice thick with feigned remorse, promising me, "This is it, Dad. The absolute last time. The final crisis, I swear." I'd bought it hook, line, and sinker. Transferred another 5,000 loonies, even reassured Eleanor that we were helping our daughter learn responsibility. What a crock, eh? In reality, all I'd been teaching her was that consequences were merely optional extras, easily paid away. The final screen presented a stark summary of my actions. Credit access, removed automated payments, cancelled, PIN codes, updated. 30 years of misguided enabling, systematically undone in a swift 30 minutes of methodical clicking. The prompt gleamed, "Save changes." I looked up from the screen out my office window. The suburban evening was continuing its peaceful, familiar rhythm. The Maxwells next door were probably out in their backyard, the scent of their BBQ drifting faintly on the breeze. Down the street, someone was walking their dog, its little leash jingling gently. Normal families living normal lives, enjoying a peaceful Sunday evening, not dealing with adult children who thought sending live snakes was a hilarious Father's Day surprise. I clicked save. The confirmation appeared instantly. Account changes processed. Updated information will be available immediately. Leaning back in my old leather desk chair, a strange, unburdened feeling settled over me. It wasn't the usual frantic scramble to bail Chloe out of her latest self-made crisis. It was the quiet, steely resolve of a father who had finally learned that sometimes love meant drawing a line in the snow. Tomorrow, like the first big freeze after a long, warm autumn, she'd hit the wall. Her credit card, once my endless well, would be drier than a prairie dust bowl. Her auto payments, funded by me for years, would bounce like a rogue puck. Her assumed access to the Bank of Dad would simply vanish, leaving her to face the chill consequences of her own choices, probably for the first time in her adult life. The silence from my phone felt heavy, but I knew it was just the calm before the storm. When morning finally dawned, it carried an unfamiliar, almost unsettling quiet. I sat at our kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, the local paper spread before me, watching the early sunlight cut through the window and illuminate Eleanor's little herb garden on the sill. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no knot of dread in my stomach, no anxious anticipation of the next manufactured financial emergency, no fear of her manipulative calls. Eleanor moved through the kitchen with the quiet grace of someone who'd shared 38 years of mornings, refilling my mug without a word. She hadn't pressed me about my late-night session in the office, but the soft, knowing smile playing on her lips told me she understood perfectly what had transpired. Precisely at 8:15, the phone jolted me. Chloe blinked on the caller ID, a familiar, foreboding sight. I let it ring twice more, using those precious seconds to steady my resolve, to armor myself. "Good morning, Chloe." I said, my voice as even as a curling sheet. Dad, what in the name of Beulah have you done? My card isn't working. Her voice, sharp and shrill with panic, hit me like a splash of icy lake water. I tried to buy groceries, and it was declined. The automatic payment for my car insurance bounced. What is happening? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting the silence hang heavy before I replied. Chloe, I said, my voice calm as a summer evening. I know you sent me that Father's Day gift. The line went dead silent, save for the faint hum of the connection. For a few long heartbeats, only the tick of the kitchen clock broke the quiet. When she finally spoke again, the panic had vanished, replaced by a raw, defensive fury. You've completely lost your mind. How could you set me up like this? Set her up. There was no "what are you talking about?" No "what Father's Day gift?" The daughter who'd terrorized me with a live animal was now accusing me of setting traps. I didn't do anything, I replied, my tone flat, unyielding. I simply stopped funding your financial irresponsibility. This is insane, she shrieked, her voice scaling new heights of outrage. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills, obligations, responsibilities. Responsibilities. The word hung in the air, a bitter, hollow echo. I let the word resonate, a silent indictment. Like the responsibility to treat your parents with a lick of respect, Chloe, or the responsibility to manage your own damn finances instead of bleeding mine dry. Eleanor had paused her morning tasks, her eyes fixed on my face, searching for any tremor of my usual stress. But I felt remarkably steady, almost removed from Chloe's spiraling hysteria. Dad, please, you don't understand. Liam and I are really struggling right now. The apartment rent is due, and my car payment. Your car payment that I've been making for 2 years, Chloe. I interrupted, my voice clear. Your apartment rent that's come out of my account every single month. Perhaps it's finally time you understood what real financial responsibility looks like. Fine. You want to play games. Her voice spiked to a pitch that would have had me caving yesterday, but now it just sounded desperate. Then don't expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. Emma and Jake won't even remember you by the time. Chloe. I cut her off, my voice quiet but firm as a winter gale. Those threats stopped working yesterday morning. The line went quiet again, save for the harsh sound of her rapid breathing. I could almost hear her brain recalibrating, frantically sifting through her arsenal of manipulation tactics, searching for the one that had always worked before. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she whispered, her voice suddenly adopting that wounded, almost sickly, sweet tone that had unlocked my wallet more times than I could count. I'm your daughter. I'm struggling, and instead of helping me, you're punishing me for something I didn't even do. Something she didn't even do. Still no direct denial, no genuine confusion about the gift I'd mentioned. Just the practiced deflection of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and was furious at the sudden sharp sting of consequences. My voice remained steady, a calm bedrock against her rising tide of hysteria. Your struggles, Chloe, are no longer my responsibility. Your own choices brought you to this point. Your choices sent that package. And your choices, not mine, will dictate what happens next. You're being absolutely ridiculous, she shrieked, the sound grating. One little prank and you completely lose your mind. One little prank. There it was, loud and clear. Not a direct confession, no, but the casual dismissal sealed it tighter than a well-packed canoe. Her panicked outrage had already given her away, but that phrase, that casual prank, solidified the chilling truth. So she'd sent me a live snake, a creature packed into a box and delivered to my doorstep on Father's Day as a little prank. And she honestly expected me to keep bankrolling her entire life. "Chloe," I said, my voice dropping, "a prank involving a live animal isn't little, not by a long shot. And a father finally putting an end to 30 years of enabling isn't losing his mind. He's finally finding it, The temperature on the line plummeted. Her voice, when it came again, was arctic. "This isn't over, old man. You think you can control me by controlling money. We'll see about that." The line went dead with a click that echoed in the quiet kitchen. I set the phone down gently, almost reverently, on the counter. Eleanor was there, her eyes fixed on my face, a silent admiration growing in their depths. The morning sun still spilled through the window, illuminating her little herb garden on the sill, casting a warm glow on the table. My coffee miraculously still tasted perfect. "She's coming here," Eleanor said quietly, her voice laced with certainty. I nodded, already knowing. "Probably with Liam. They'll want to continue this conversation in person, eh? Are you ready for that, Robert?" she asked, her gaze steady. Took a breath, contemplating the question. Was I truly ready for Chloe, our only daughter, to show up on our doorstep, with her freeloading husband demanding money she felt entitled to, leveraging the grandkids she'd already turned into pawns? The image was vivid, raw, but something had fundamentally shifted inside me. "Yes," I said the word solid, unwavering. "I think I am." The morning calm shattered abruptly. The roar of a car engine filled our driveway, followed by the aggressive squeal of tires. Tires squealed against the asphalt as the vehicle screeched to an abrupt halt. Then came the sharp, definitive slam of 2 car doors. Eleanor and I exchanged a glance, a silent knowing confirmation passing between us. There was no doubt who had arrived. Heavy footsteps pounded across our front walkway, a determined, almost angry rhythm. The doorbell rang, once a sharp, insistent chime, then immediately again demanding faster service. I stood slowly from the kitchen table, a surprising calm settling over me, despite the brewing storm just outside our door. "Stay here, Elle," I told Eleanor quietly. "No." Her voice, though soft, carried an unexpected strength, a quiet resolve that matched my own. "We're in this together, Robert." The persistent doorbell gave way to aggressive, impatient knocking that rattled the door frame. I walked to the front entrance and pulled it open. There on our porch stood Chloe and Liam, a 2-person army ready for battle. Chloe's face was flushed a furious red, her hair disheveled, as if she'd thrown herself into clothes and driven here in a blind rage. Liam loomed behind her, his expression a dark cloud of malice I'd never seen aimed directly at me before. "Dad," Chloe's voice vibrated with barely controlled rage. "We need to talk." "We already talked this morning, Chloe," I replied, holding my ground in the doorway, making no move to invite them inside. "I thought I was quite clear." "Clear?" She let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, sharp enough to cut the crisp morning air. "You were insane. You can't just cut me off because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package." Even now, standing on my doorstep, eyes blazing, demanding access to my money, she couldn't bring herself to utter the truth. Still deflecting, still playing the victim. "There's no misunderstanding, Chloe," I stated, my voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "You sent me a snake, and I responded accordingly." Liam stepped forward, then his bulk, filling even more of the narrow doorway, his presence an unwelcome intrusion. "Look, old man," he began, using that infuriating nickname. "Maybe you didn't think this through properly, eh? Chloe has expenses, responsibilities. The kids need things. Kids whose mother threatens to keep them away from their grandparents when she doesn't get money. I countered my voice remarkably, even betraying none of the tremor in my chest. Chloe's face contorted with a desperate, ugly fury. Fine. You want to play hardball? Dad, you'll never see your grandchildren again. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over family. The words once a cold spear to my heart, the very foundation of my deepest fears, now felt hollow, powerless. They simply bounced off the new hard-won clarity that had settled within me. I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and what I saw wasn't the sweet child I'd raised, not the goofy teenager, but the manipulative stranger she had become, hollowed out by greed and entitlement. Chloe, I said quietly, the word tasting like ash, yet delivered with a firm resolve. That's not a threat. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing their full weight to settle. That's a blessing. The shock on her face was absolute, total. This wasn't the response she'd anticipated, not the devastating blow that had for so long brought me to my knees, bending me to her will. Liam's mouth fell open, a silent gasp of disbelief. You... what? Chloe stammered, her voice thin, as if the air had been knocked out of her. If they're going to be raised by a parent who uses them as bargaining chips against their own grandparents, then maybe it's a blessing they won't be exposed to that kind of toxic manipulation while they're still figuring out the world. Liam's face, usually so glib, hardened into something truly nasty. He closed the gap between us, his breath hot on my face, smelling faintly of stale beer. We know where you live, old man, he snarled, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. We know your routines, your schedule. You might want to think long and hard about this, eh? I felt Eleanor stiffen behind me, but I held my ground solid as a rock on the Canadian shield. Are you threatening me, Liam? I asked, my voice flat, betraying no emotion. He offered a thin, unpleasant smile. Just saying, Bob, family relationships work both ways, eh? You want to cut us off? Fine, but don't expect us to just vanish like snow in July. Actually, I said, a dry chuckle escaping me, that's precisely what I expect. And if you opt not to vanish quietly, well, that becomes a matter for the Toronto police, not a family powwow. Chloe, sensing Liam was dangerously close to crossing a legal line, grabbed his arm, her grip tight. Instead of calming him, it seemed to just fan the flames. You think you're so clever, eh, Bob? Liam sneered, shaking her off. You think pulling the plug on your cash makes you some kind of big shot? There are other ways for us to get what we need. Oh, I'm sure there are. I agreed, my tone dismissive. Like, you know, getting a job, for instance. A truly novel concept, I'll admit, but people have been supporting themselves through honest work for centuries, Liam. Call it an old-fashioned approach. This isn't over, Chloe hissed, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. Her desperation had curdled into something ugly, truly ugly. You'll regret treating us like this. Family doesn't just cut ties, Dad, and there will be consequences. Oh, there already are consequences, Chloe. I stated, my voice low and unwavering. You're living them right now. They stood there, frozen for what felt like an eternity, their eyes locked on mine. In that moment, I think they finally grasped it. No amount of threats, no amount of guilt-tripping, no amount of manipulative tears would ever pry open the vault again, the bank of Dad, the institution that had propped them up for 3 decades, had finally irrevocably closed its doors. Without another word, Chloe spun on her heel, her designer handbag swinging, and stomped back to their car. Liam followed, but not before shooting me one last, truly chilling glare, a promise of future trouble in his eyes. I watched them peel out of our driveway, the BMW's engine revving loud enough to wake the dead before its taillights finally vanished around the bend. Only then did I close the door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden quiet, and turn to Eleanor. Her face was pale, still etched with the morning's anxiety, but her eyes, those beautiful, steadfast eyes, held something I hadn't seen in them for what felt like years. A quiet, profound pride. "We're going to need to talk to a lawyer, Elle," I said, my voice heavy. The evening, bless its heart, brought a quiet normalcy that had become a precious commodity in our home. Eleanor and I sat at our kitchen table after dinner, the familiar clink of dishes and the comforting hum of the fridge, a gentle counterpoint to the morning's raw chaos. She nursed a mug of herbal tea, while I poured myself a second cup of coffee, the dark brew matching the mood of my swirling thoughts. We were both processing, sifting through the wreckage of what had once been our family. This kitchen, this very table, had always been our sanctuary for the big talks. It's where we'd sketched out our dreams of buying this bungalow, debated retirement plans, pored over college funds, and yes, fretted over Chloe's early struggles with managing a loony. Now it was the silent witness to the complete brutal collapse of our family dynamic. "I keep thinking about her, Robert," Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile peace. "When she was just a little tyke, maybe 8. Remember that Mother's Day breakfast? She made burnt toast, orange juice with half a forest of pulp in it. But she was so proud, her little face beaming." I did remember. Chloe in her mismatched pajamas standing on that rickety kitchen stool, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to make us breakfast in bed. That memory so vivid now felt like it belonged to a different life, a different family entirely. "She used to draw us pictures, too," I murmured, staring into my coffee. "Stick figures of us holding hands. I kept them in my office desk drawer for years. I still have some up in that old memory box in the attic," Eleanor said, her voice thick with a maternal grief that tugged at my heart. "Robert," she continued, her eyes meeting mine, "she's still our daughter, despite everything that happened today." It was the sentence I'd been bracing for all day. Eleanor's core, her unwavering instinct to heal, to bridge the chasm, to somehow glue back together what felt irrevocably shattered. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen head over heels for, that unwavering belief that families like resilient maple trees could weather any storm. "Eleanor," I said gently, reaching across the table to cover her hand. She crossed a line, a big one, and I have one more step to take. Her teacup, poised halfway to her lips, froze. "What kind of step, Robert?" she asked, her voice hushed, her gaze fixed on me. I looked at Eleanor's face, seeing the concern there mixed with a sliver of that old, persistent hope that whatever I was planning might somehow reel Chloe back in, rather than pushing her further out into the cold. How could I even begin to explain that bringing her back wasn't even on the radar anymore? Something permanent. I stated, my voice low and firm. Something that ensures we never face a morning like this again, eh? "You're talking about changing the will." It wasn't a question, more a quiet, dawning recognition. Eleanor knew me, truly knew the way my mind worked, understood that a solid legal fort was the only thing left standing between us and perpetual chaos. Yes. She was quiet for a long, heavy moment, grappling with the sheer weight of what I was suggesting. Reshaping our entire estate plan wasn't just about money. It was a formal, undeniable declaration that our own daughter Chloe was no longer someone we could trust. "The grandchildren," she finally whispered, her voice fragile. "Emma and Jake. Maybe they'll be better off not learning that real love can be bought and sold like a hockey card." I reached across the scarred kitchen table, and firmly took her hand. Eleanor, what Chloe pulled today wasn't some desperate last-ditch effort. It was cold, calculated cruelty. The snake, the threats, the endless manipulation. That's the person she's chosen to become, plain and simple. If we cut her off completely, we're not just protecting our savings, we're protecting ourselves from future emotional abuse. We're protecting us, our marriage, from constantly drowning in her manufactured crises. We're protecting the retirement we slaved for Eleanor from being slowly siphoned off by someone who sees us as a personal credit union, not as her parents. Eleanor squeezed my hand back her thumb, stroking across my knuckles that familiar gesture that had always grounded me through decades of smaller bumps in the road. This wasn't just a small challenge, though. Was it, Robert? This was the absolute end of something fundamental. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Will it stop her?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "If you really change everything legally, will she finally just leave us alone, eh?" "It'll yank away her incentive for contact." I replied the words feeling cold and hard, but entirely necessary. No more easy access to our money, no inheritance to protect, no leverage to maintain. She'll have to find other poor souls to manipulate. The pragmatism of it cut like a winter wind, but it was the only way. Chloe would simply move on to easier targets, people who hadn't yet learned to recognize her toxic patterns. "I hate that it's come to this, Robert," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with sorrow. "So do I." I admitted my own throat tight. But I won't spend our golden years being held hostage by her threats and endless manipulation. I won't let her destroy everything we've built together brick by brick over nearly 4 decades. Outside our kitchen window, the suburban evening carried on its peaceful, familiar rhythm. The Maxwells next door were walking their golden retriever. Down the street, Mrs. Dillon was watering her prize-winning petunias. Normal people living normal lives. "When will you do it?" Eleanor asked, pulling me back to our own fractured reality. "Tomorrow morning," I confirmed. "I'll call Margaret Summers first thing. She's been our go-to for legal stuff for 15 years. She'll know exactly what needs to be done to make it ironclad, eh?" Eleanor nodded slowly, accepting the hard truth, even as it broke something deep inside her. And when Chloe finds out, and she will eventually by then, all the legal protections will be locked down tighter than a vault at the Bank of Canada. Her anger won't be able to touch us anymore. I stood up from the table, gathering our empty mugs to take to the sink. Behind me I heard Eleanor's quiet sigh, a soft exhalation of sorrow. Not disagreement, not anger, but profound grief for the daughter we'd lost, the family we'd thought we were. Tomorrow I would take that final, harrowing step. Tonight, though, I would simply hold my wife and let her mourn. Margaret Summers' law office was on the 3rd floor of a sturdy granite building downtown, the kind that whispered of old money and quiet competence. Her walls were lined with legal tomes, their spines a testament to 15 years of protecting families like ours. I sat across from her gleaming mahogany desk, a thick manila folder of documents heavy on my lap, feeling a strange, hollow calm that I hadn't experienced in weeks. "Robert," she said, taking off her reading glasses, her gaze direct and unwavering. "When you called this morning, you mentioned needing some comprehensive legal protection. Robert, tell me exactly what's been going on." Margaret had handled our wills, property transfers, Eleanor's mother's estate. She knew us as the solid, predictable couple who always planned ahead and paid their bills promptly. What I was about to describe would sound like a completely different family, a twisted reflection of the one she thought she knew. I laid it all out, the bitter inheritance argument, the disturbing snake delivery, the cut-off credit cards, yesterday's ugly threatening confrontation right on our doorstep. Margaret listened without a single interruption, her expression unreadable, occasionally scribbling a terse note in her pad. Her expression, which had been so composed, grew steadily more serious with each detail I relayed. They know where we live. I concluded the words chillingly flat. They know our routines, our schedules. It wasn't just a statement. It was a direct, unmistakable threat. Margaret set down her pen, the small click echoing in the quiet office, and leaned back, her gaze unwavering. "Robert," she said, her voice firm, "what you're describing goes far beyond a simple family disagreement. This is textbook harassment and intimidation." A deep breath escaped me, a tension I hadn't realized I was holding, finally loosening its grip. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Margaret, ever efficient, pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's start with your will. You mentioned wanting to restructure your inheritance. I want my money to go directly to Emma and Jake's education." I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "Every penny. Not a single cent to Chloe's gambling debts or Liam's next harebrained scheme." Margaret gave a subtle nod. "That's a wise and entirely achievable decision, Robert. We can establish an educational trust fund. It will provide for Emma and Jake's schooling, college expenses, and any other legitimate educational needs, all while ensuring absolutely no access for their parents." She began sketching out the framework, explaining how an independent trustee would manage the funds, releasing money only for documented, verified educational expenses. Chloe and Liam would have no control, no ability to manipulate the children's future inheritance. "What about Eleanor?" I asked, my priority always crystal clear. "Fully protected, of course." Margaret reassured me, her professional warmth reassuring. "The house, your retirement accounts, her security. Nothing changes there. This only affects what would have by default gone to Chloe." Next on the agenda was the restraining order. Margaret opened a new file, her movements precise, and began methodically recording yesterday's confrontation on our doorstep. The aggressive language, the escalating pattern of demands, the threats that had culminated in outright intimidation. "The snake incident is particularly concerning." She noted, her pen scratching swiftly across the paper. "Using live animals to frighten family, especially elderly parents, demonstrates a level of planning and malice that the courts take very seriously indeed." "How long does all this take?" I asked, eager for a timeline. "The will modifications can be finalized within the week," she replied. "The restraining order can be filed by end of business today. Once it's granted, any contact from Chloe or Liam transforms from a family squabble into a serious legal matter." A profound sense of relief washed over me, a physical lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. The suffocating weight of being perpetually available for Chloe's manufactured crises, of walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her threats, of knowingly enabling her destructive behavior. All of it was finally, irrevocably ending. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, pulling me back to the present. "Based on everything you've described, I strongly recommend meticulously documenting everything from this point forward. Keep records of any attempts to contact you, any potential violations of the order, any attempts to involve the grandchildren. You think it will get worse before it gets better, eh?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. People who rely on manipulation and threats rarely accept boundaries gracefully, Robert, she stated plainly. When Chloe discovers she's been cut out of your will and served with a restraining order, her reaction may be significant. But that no longer truly frightened me. With these ironclad legal protections in place, her anger, when it inevitably erupted, would be directed at a system designed to handle such behavior, not at two elderly parents trying to finally enjoy their hard-earned retirement. Margaret's assistant, a quiet young woman named Sarah, brought in the prepared documents, the revised will, the trust fund specifics, the initial filing for the restraining order. As I signed my name to each page, a deep, satisfying sense of finality settled over me. 30 years of misguided financial enabling was officially ending. Our home would be legally protected from any further harassment. The restraining order, Margaret assured me, should be approved by the end of business today. Court officers will serve both Chloe and Liam by tomorrow morning, she confirmed. After that, any contact with you or Eleanor becomes a criminal matter. I stood extending my hand to the woman who had just helped me reclaim control of my own life, a silent gratitude passing between us. Outside her office windows, the bustling Toronto city continued its normal, indifferent rhythm. Robert Margaret called. Just as I reached her door, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. You've made the right choices. Your family's safety and security always come first. I nodded, tucking the folder securely under my arm. Tomorrow morning, Chloe would discover that manipulation was no longer an option. Tonight, Eleanor and I would sleep peacefully, truly peacefully, knowing the law was finally decisively on our side. The peace that settled over our home was like the first truly mild spring day after a long, brutal winter. Eleanor and I fell back into the comfortable rhythms that Chloe's endless crises had so relentlessly interrupted. Our morning coffee was savored without the familiar knot of dread that came with every ring. Our afternoon walks by the ravine were enjoyed without me constantly checking my pocket for a missed, urgent message. Evening dinners were for the first time in years simply about us, about the quiet clink of forks on plates, not about dissecting Chloe's latest financial emergency. Then on Thursday afternoon, the phone rang, and it was Margaret. "Robert," she said, her voice clear and precise. "The documents were delivered at 2:15 today. Both Chloe and Liam have been served with the restraining order, and they've received copies of the will modifications. It's done." I mumbled my thanks and hung up, sitting quietly in my armchair for a long moment, simply breathing. Outside our living room window, Mrs. Henderson was already out meticulously planting spring flowers in her garden, her bright yellow tulips, a cheerful splash against the green. Down the street, the Maxwell kids were riding their bicycles on the sidewalk, their excited shrieks drifting faintly on the breeze. Normal suburban life continuing its peaceful, predictable rhythm untouched by the storm that had just passed through ours. "The papers were delivered?" Eleanor asked softly from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands nervously on a dish towel. "This afternoon." I confirmed, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "It's finished, Elle." She came and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers, her touch a steadying anchor. We didn't need to discuss what Chloe's reaction might be, or whether she would try to find ways around the ironclad legal barriers Margaret had so carefully erected. The law was clear. The protections were comprehensive. And for the first time in 30 years, we were truly free from her manipulation, free from the suffocating grip of her manufactured chaos. I thought about the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who'd so earnestly drawn stick-figure families, us holding hands, beaming, and who on special occasions would present us with burnt toast and pulpy orange juice for breakfast in bed. That sweet child had somehow transformed into a woman who sent a live snake to her own father, and threatened to weaponize his grandchildren against him. The change I realized now had been gradual enough that I'd spent decades making excuses for increasingly unacceptable behavior, always hoping she'd come back to the daughter we knew. But the woman who'd stood on our doorstep just days ago demanding money and spewing threats wasn't someone I needed to enable any longer. The legal documents had finally created the boundaries that love alone had never been able to establish. They had wanted to control our lives, our money. Now they'd gotten what they wanted, us completely out of their lives. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Chloe had spent years threatening to cut off my access to Emma and Jake whenever I didn't comply with her financial demands. Now, through her own escalating desperate behavior, she'd ensured that separation permanently, while simultaneously losing any claim to the inheritance she'd been so fiercely desperate to control. Emma and Jake would be provided for their future, secured through the educational trust fund, managed by professionals who couldn't be manipulated or threatened. Their college expenses, tutoring books, legitimate educational needs, all would be taken care of, secured, without giving their parents access to resources they'd proven so utterly incapable of managing responsibly. Eleanor squeezed my hand again, her eyes searching mine. "Do you think she understands what she's lost, Robert?" she whispered. "She will," I said, my voice firm. "The restraining order means any attempt to contact us becomes a criminal matter, eh? The will changes mean there's no inheritance to fight for, no financial incentive to maintain even hostile contact. She'll have to find other poor souls to manipulate, and if she violates the restraining order, then it becomes the police department's problem, not ours." For 30 long years, I'd been Chloe's personal safety net, catching her every fall while she learned absolutely nothing from the experience. I'd sold my classic pickup truck to pay her gambling debts. I'd covered her apartment rent when she claimed unexpected emergencies. I'd written check after check, always believing that this time would be different. This crisis would finally be the last one. The snake, I realized, had been her final, desperate communication with me. Everything she wanted to say about our relationship, everything ugly and venomous, had been contained in that box, designed to frighten and intimidate, to drive me back into compliance. But instead of driving me back into the same old cycle, it had driven me to Margaret's office and the ironclad legal protections I should have sought years earlier. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through our kitchen window, Eleanor and I prepared dinner together with the quiet, easy cooperation of a couple who no longer carried the exhausting weight of constant family drama. No phone ringing off the hook, no frantic, demanding texts. Just the gentle hum of our suburban life finally restored. The familiar pattern of frantic phone calls, the emergency texts demanding immediate financial rescue, the chilling threats about access to our grandchildren. All of it had simply ceased. The quiet that settled over our home now was profound, like the breathless stillness after a truly brutal Canadian winter storm finally blows itself out, leaving crisp, clear air in its wake. Tomorrow, Eleanor and I would wake up in a house legally fortified against any further emotional onslaught, protected by the legal boundaries we'd finally firmly drawn. Our retirement savings, the nest egg we'd scrimped and saved for, would finally grow unimpeded, dedicated solely to our peace of mind, not slowly drained by someone else's impulsive gambles or reckless spending. Our marriage, which had weathered its own share of squalls, could now flourish without the relentless undertow of Chloe's manufactured crises. I had in a way reclaimed myself, not just my money, but my role as a father who finally understood that true love sometimes means drawing a line in the snow, letting go of the desperate need to fix everything for everyone. Legal boundaries had become the solid ground beneath our feet, replacing the shifting sands of emotional manipulation and unearned guilt. The law hadn't just protected our assets. It had given me back my peace, my sleep, my life, Tonight, for the first time in what felt like decades, I wouldn't lie awake endlessly replaying conversations, wondering what fresh chaos tomorrow's crisis would bring, or what it would cost me in dollars and in spirit.